Okay, hello, good evening. Thank you for coming out tonight. I have the pleasure to introduce Jen today. She's one of our Ortungs artists. Ortung, we are having Hintersee for 3 weeks now. Our workshop is gonna be Friday, the one before, one after. Jen is a designer. She is She's from California, and she is researching games and social interaction between games. I got to know her in Slovenia in PIF Camp, where she was prototyping a game where we were basically trading spices and creating dishes. And for this, I would like to give you the stage.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Subnet, for inviting, and thank you, Shmidi, for inviting too. So my name is Jennifer Katanyoutantant. I am LA-born but Bangkok-based. I'm Thai, obviously, from my last name. And at the moment, I work in the intersection of art and technology, mainly with virtual and augmented reality. And so, I work for some festivals, doing the production around VR, AR sections, and as well as the design of some installations. And for, and so before diving into the project that I'm working on, and to give you a little bit more about a context about myself, I actually studied journalism and cognitive science, and so I started from a very different background, and worked in marketing communications for startups and NGOs for a long time. But over the course of doing that, I started to wear down. Took a year-long break where I joined a friend who was working at a human rights NGO in Burma, and we did a tour of different human rights areas, NGOs. In that country. Along the way, we found a lot of problems connected with technology, because at that time, the internet was still very new. They had only recently gotten widely available internet like 3 years before. So there were a lot of issues happening in villages where people would take the Facebook photos and Photoshop them onto naked bodies, and then blackmail a lot of the women in the villages to get money. And a lot of suicides happened from that. And so at that point, I started to think a little bit more about the impact of technologies on developing nations and how to develop technologies more equitably. Oh, as well as a lot of the phones were I guess, affordable for the people. There were Huawei phones. And those ones didn't have Burmese as a language option. And it was also very difficult to program English as an option too. So it was sort of like people were forced to learn Mandarin, which became kind of a form of technological/language imperialism. And so that kind of got me into the mindset of thinking about technologies, emerging technologies, and how it intersects with developing nations. Along the way, I started to think a little bit more about some of the popular games that were getting popular like about 2 years ago. And so Pokemon Go was a really big one. From there, I started thinking a little bit more about surveillance capitalism and the data that is being collected and how it's going to be used in the future. And so, how I'm sure a lot of people here have read about the surveillance in what's going on in China and the surveillance issues there, and how surveillance has become a really big export for the country. Along the way, I also started thinking a little bit more about food and how it can be used as an entry port into understanding a lot of these systems and how and why humans design them in such a way. Okay, and so that's a little bit more about the why of what I'm interested in the themes. How I've actually never been someone who played a lot of games as a kid. I love to make up games. I loved to make up little worlds and kind of decide rules around those worlds. And so that kind of snowballed into thinking a little bit more about the different worlds that people are creating through technologies like virtual and augmented reality. Okay, so and a little bit more about how I came into thinking using food as interaction for games. Food, I felt like a very interesting sensory interaction. And games itself seemed like an extension of rituals. And so I just really enjoy thinking about how food can be a component of games when they already are a component of rituals. Like, I grew up in a largely immigrant community, and every year we would have like a death day where we would celebrate the deaths of ancestors. And food was always a huge component of that, where we would spend the day making food, we would put it out onto an altar, we would do a prayer 3 times before noon, and it was a way to kind of respect people and send the spirit of the food into like heaven. And I thought that it was such an interesting focal point, and how can I kind of take that focal point and translate it into something else, into another experience. I also grew up in a culture where food is a form of implicit communication. Like it's such a trope, it's such a big stereotype. Like in Asian communities, you never really hear an I love you, but you do see like a bowl of peeled apples every day. And that's a way of saying it without really saying it. And so I thought that was such a powerful thing, and I wanted to explore that more. Which leads me to why I'm here. Ortang is such a good opportunity for me to kind of look at Austrian food and look at the way that Austrian culture is exhibited through food. And so that's kind of what I've been working on at the residency. I'm more making mini games, and I would love your advice and your feedback on how to incorporate more Austrian flavors into gaming. Okay, so this is an experiment that I did in the past at this really great conference. It's called the Digital Naturalism Conference. It's an amazing experience if you ever get the chance. It's basically all about human-computer interaction, but in the wild. And so they set up all of these stations in a jungle in Thailand. And kind of just got people together to play with things. And so the 3 main rules of the conference are: you have to make something, you have to help someone make something, and you have to document it. And so there were people who made camera traps and did, were counting fish. And I ended up making, along with a team of other people who, some were engineers, some were from PIF Camp. They were sound people, and some were foragers. And I'm going to show you a quick video about some of the stuff that we did there. Yeah, this conference travels every year. So next year, I think, or the past year, it was in Panama. Yeah, so this is a local artist. She works a lot with found beach plastic. So we ended up going around this island with her and foraging different items to make this. It's a Thai snack called miang kham, and back in the day, it was like a royal snack. So this is our main house for it's like a 3-month drop-in, drop-out conference. So we made a little sculpture. Yeah, and a lot of these are foraged items from the jungle. Okay, so this dish that we made, miang kham, it is basically a pepper leaf, a green leaf with a lot of different ingredients on them. And what we did was we put each of the different ingredients, which are, range from bitter to sour to sweet, pretty much every ingredient on the flavor spectrum, and rearranged it in the leaves that you saw. And we had a LED running around attached to a big red button. And so the big red button, anytime you pushed it, it would light up 2 random colors. So you match 2 ingredients from the different flavor spectrums, so you can see how different combinations changes the flavor of what you eat. And we thought that it was a fun way to really think about why certain flavors go together. Like, for example, in Thai food, if you eat something that is too spicy, you have an herb to neutralize the spice. And it's something that you don't really kind of think about. It's just you get a dish that's a spicy dish, and then you get a plate full of vegetables, and you kind of become it's a common thing to just eat it together. And so we were kind of breaking that down and having people think about why you eat certain foods together, why certain things go together, and how you can change the combinations and make something new. Okay, so this is, has anyone seen this trend on YouTube? No? Okay, so this is gonna be a fun thing to explain. So this is called Mukbang. It's a Korean YouTube trend that started from live streaming, where people would, you basically just eat a ton of food on camera, and the audience at home will either listen to the sounds, or they'll write in and ask you to eat, certain foods, or it's sort of like voyeuristic eating. And these people make so much money, though. It's like crazy. So I interviewed a couple people who do this regularly. And this was one woman who makes like 8,000 US a month from making like 20-minute long videos every day. And so it's, I mean, like, what are we doing with our lives? Like, that's such... But so basically this experiment was about looking at the origin of this trend, which comes from, in Korean culture, it's normal to eat with your family, but once people started moving into the cities, people started living alone. And so this trend came up as sort of a surrogate family meal. So you have someone to eat with. And it's become very popular all over YouTube. So you see like really big Western YouTube stars that are doing this trend. It's crazy, right? But it's like, yeah, it's super popular for some reason. It's like hitting some nerve in who we are as humans, and I was really interested in seeing kind of why and how it works. And so for this experiment, I was looking at how does this trend affect fish stocks. A really big trend in mukbang is to buy giant plates of seafood and sashimi and these like 300-year-old lobsters that are big, like the claws bigger than your head. And so I started thinking about if we're living in the golden age of seafood right now, and it's things are being overfished, and like fishermen are taking from young stocks and they're not able to repopulate, what happens in the future, and especially what happens when this kind of trend goes to places around Asia that are, developing a lot, and seafood has become such a status symbol for a lot of people, for a lot of new wealth. And so what happens when this trend becomes very popular with, with more people? How does it affect our fish stocks in the future? And so I am gonna play like a 9-second clip right here of a performance that came out of that, where, oh. So basically, that's me over there, and this guy, we had to match motions to simulate the sort of mutually assured destruction that I felt will kind of come out of this trend. It's a critique on the trend, but it's also like I understand why it's so popular too. Like it does make sense, especially in a place where, like in Southeast Asia especially, the kind of development around internet that, what took place over a span of maybe like 100 years in the West took place over a span of maybe 10 years in Southeast Asia. So I think there is a different attachment to social media, to the internet, to connecting with people online, and especially seeing how attached people in Burma were to their phones, because it is their only source of communication to the outside world, because their country was so closed in for so long. Like, it sounds silly, but I totally get why it exists. And so this experiment, the music that you heard in the background was especially formulated to the number of people that were standing around us. And so the more people that would come into the circle, the faster the music would get and the faster we would have to eat. And because my motion was matched to that guy's motion, we wouldn't know who was the one eating faster. And so it was sort of like saying, you know, we like our health as two separate people, me like a mukbanger and the mukbang audience, it's connected to the like a wider mukbang audience. Like, well, the algorithm that that shows these kinds of videos in the feed. And that guy is actually a competitive eater. And so it was so painful, actually. And yeah, later on in the video, I'm kind of like telling him to stop, but he didn't, which is good in the end. But it was, I did throw up later. So this is, you know, comes back to the game that Rudiger mentioned earlier. It's a game about migration and looking at the different ingredients that make their way around the country. And so this is my partner, Grace. We thought of it when we were talking about like the tomato. The tomato is a South American ingredient, but it is something that, you know, it's so integral to pizza, which is very Italian. And we were just very interested in the ways that ingredients can travel and can kind of other cultures and other countries take ownership of the full identity of the ingredient when it comes from so far away. And there's every dish you eat every day, there's a constant reminder of, you know, these giant global trades that we just forget. And so we wanted to make a game that reminds people of how far food really comes, and this idea that there's no such thing as authentic food or an authentic dish. In this iteration, we were trying to get people to make combinations that would either you roll the dice and you see who eats it. So for this one, some people, I mean me, some people like me would try to make combinations that were really gross and force other people to eat it. But I think in the next iteration, we might make it a little bit more storytelling based, where we get people to more talk about kind of their feelings towards different ingredients. And like one story in particular that we really liked was we had this fermented beet that was kind of being passed around as like a punishment for people. But this one guy who is from Ljubljana, he talked about how the beet was a, like you eat it to, like when you have a cold or when you're sick as a kid. And so the purpose of this game is to really kind of uncover stories like that and get people to talk about the emotional connections they have to certain foods. And to build new emotional connections by incorporating those foods into other dishes. And so this game we'll continue working on at another residency later in the year. Okay, so this is, this is a breakfast project that I've been working on at Ortung. Has anyone here played Battleship? The game where, okay, yeah. So it's pretty much that same concept where you've got a bomb in some parts of the bread and you take turns cutting out pieces. And I've always loved playing with food. And I'm glad that I'm finally getting a chance as an adult to do it. Like I'm a real grown-up. So yeah, this is version 1 on the left. I chose a jam as a bomb, but it was too dark. And so version 2, I used dried egg I got from some souvenir shop in China. And Rudiger said it tastes like salmon, like smoked salmon. And so that was like the bomb in different parts of the squares. And so, yeah, I am going to continue developing different forms of this kind of mechanic, but probably with different ingredients. Okay, and so this is another mini game, basically taking the prisoner's dilemma, where I took this from a British game show, actually. It's called Golden Balls. Has anyone seen Golden Balls? Okay, so basically you've got a lump sum of money and you have to, like you split or steal it. And so the idea is if you split it between two people, both of you share the lump sum of money. But if one person splits and one person steals, then the person who steals gets all the money. And so both people are incentivized to say they're going to split, but then actually steal. And so yeah, Rudiger and Vera played this game with that red packet it's called bull paddywhack. I couldn't read the Chinese, so I don't know exactly what it is, but I think it's bull testicle. So yeah, some bull testicle and spicy Szechuan sauce. The sauce was delicious. And the candy on the right, or I guess on the left, my left, is mango milk candy. And by the way, I also brought some durian candy if anyone wants to try it. So yeah, they played this was like a practice session, and I was so sure that Rudiger was gonna steal. So I was really surprised that they ended up like splitting the bull testicle in the end. Okay. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of who I am, a quick introduction of who I am. And the next portion of the talk is a conversation. And so I'm really curious to hear some feedback or some comments or some suggestions on how I can kind of continue this line of experimentation here in Austria. And if you have any suggestions on, like, starting points for using Austrian food or flavors as interactions, or maybe some, like in the end, I'd like these games to be playable to anyone. And I would love some like comments on ways that I could maybe present it in a way that makes it enticing for more people to play, or yeah, some better conditions for experimentation. I open the floor to everyone. Yeah.
Any starters?
Thank you for your talk. I really enjoyed that. So since you're asking for suggestions, what I find interesting, what you said in your intro, that from a cultural perspective, you have a lot of experience with like food and food making as a cultural thing, and I think it's very interesting. I'm not Austrian, so I'm Dutch, and I know both the Dutch and Austrian cuisine to be very straightforward and practical, much different than, for example, Italian and French cuisine that is much more about the enjoyment and experience and drawing it out and doing many courses. And I was wondering if that kind of practical aspect of the way we eat in Austria, in the Netherlands, could play a role in the games as well.
Yeah, I think so. Especially because I like Thai food and Chinese food. It's all about really loud flavors from completely different ends of like a flavor spectrum. And I think it's really interesting to work with a lot of very simple flavors, because then you can kind of go deep into one flavor. And it's a completely different experience of, like, I think Thai food especially is you have to have a lot of different ingredients to make a completely different thing. Whereas a lot of the Austrian food that I've been having at Ortung was like one ingredient done very, very well, or like very differently. And so I think that's a really good starting point. I'm curious to see. I think what I've been kind of thinking about is all of the games that I've made have started from looking at a game mechanic. And next, I really want to look at an ingredient and try to make something out of that. And so I think it's really interesting to look at base flavors and maybe, yeah, see how to add to that in some way. And yeah, if you have any suggestions for that, I'd love to hear that.
Well, I don't know about base flavors, but just your mentioning game mechanics made me think about time and turn taking, how that could play a role as well in different styles of dining, and who takes the first bite, who takes the first turn, who serves the food, who gets to be the game master, that kind of stuff. Sorry, not much ingredient based.
No, yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, I haven't thought of time and turn making yet, so that's something that I want to experiment with.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I really enjoyed your talk. I grew up on on an organic farm in the Alps, and we spend a lot of time foraging for food in the forest, like mushrooms and berries. So maybe you maybe you come back in summer and go for a trip in just 2 hours from here and do a little bit of mushroom hunting. You might have a lot of inspiration. And I thought, like lingonberries, we have a lot of lingonberries, for example, that would be something to play with because they're red and they kind of have a very unique flavor and you can dry them. That was something that came to my mind. And so I think there's a lot of interesting stuff here you could play with.
And I guess, like, what is the tradition around like foraging? Is that is it something? Is it a position that everyone knows where all the best mushroom places are, or is it something very specialized? Huh?
Well, since
no one knows
it really
anything.
depends. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Mushroom secret.
It really depends on the family, but I lived. I lived on a farm very close to the forest, so my brothers, they would know the mushroom places, and we would even sell them to restaurants and stuff. And it would be a very kind of family event because you have to carry a lot of kilos of mushrooms. So I would do the looking and my brother would do the carrying, and in the evening all of us would sit together and clean the mushrooms and then sell them the next day. I mean, some here might feel this sounds very old-fashioned and stuff, but I think it's a very unique kind of cultural things we did at home. And also, it really depends on what you're foraging. With the mushrooms, it's more like everybody going off by themselves, and then at the end of the day, you meet at the car in order to drive the mushrooms back. But when you go for berries, lingonberries, for example, in fall, it would be more like a family thing because you would just, 5 meters next to each other and pick berries. It doesn't take as much space to find them. So it really depends on the type of stuff you're looking for, how the process would evolve. But yeah, my family would know the spots and, not tell anybody, of course, because...
Okay, I'll come back to you in the spring.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks for your talk. It was really, really nice. Maybe building up on the previous answer, I don't know, maybe you looked into that already, but an idea is look at heirloom varieties and heirloom seeds. For example, things instead of organic growing, but plants that are, kind of a heritage, let's say. I have no idea what is a heirloom seed here in Austria, but it could be something a bit, I don't know, used as an educational tool as well. And next to that, maybe you can look into how, there's a lot of food cultures, and maybe you can look into how different players could have different characters. I have a few here. That was part of a conference actually, but I think it was nice ideas. So they had food altruists or gastromasochists, or so all these weird cults. It plays a lot on the fiction part of the spectrum, but I think it's a very nice idea to play around with food cultures.
I want to hear more about gastromasochists.
Yes. There's a whole bunch of categories here, but yeah, you can have a look. Definitely.
I like that one. It's funny that you mentioned characters. Actually, in an early iteration of the migration game, we were thinking of doing have each person be an ingredient themselves, and so maybe one person be tomatoes, another person be potatoes, and then they travel around the world trying to spread their seed so they can survive apocalypse. And then we have cards that have different kinds of environmental environmental conditions or wars that disrupt different food productions. But yeah, we had the idea and then we didn't really explore it. So yeah, thanks for reminding me of that.
Yes, for me, to the food is also belonging the way of eating the food. And for me, it's sometimes nice or sometimes really not nice to watch other people eating. And sometimes you can say a bit where the person is coming, from where the person is coming. So if you watch Japanese people eating, it's another way than Chinese, because Chinese are every time happy to eat. And you see it, also the Korean ones. So for me, the act of eating is also something really interesting, and let us see to the culture if somebody is loving it, if he is going to show it to the other people that he is loving the food, or how to act if you don't like the food. We have been educated not to show it if you don't like it. And as I was growing up, there was a lot of rules how to eat. And sometimes today I miss it, these rules. If I'm going to, sometimes with other people, I think, did you never think about the food you're eating or something like this? So there's a big culture for me also around, or rules or something you can put into a play perhaps, or a game, how to act with the food. Or
That's so true. Like with eating noodles, you know, to show that you like the noodles, you slurp it up when you make the noise. And
here you have never to make it.
Yeah, it's different culture to culture. So like when you like something, or like when you don't like anything, you just, like when someone asks, like and the cook asks you, like, oh, how was it? Do you just lie? Oh, okay. But is it kind of like a, you know?
And there are methods how to put the food from one side of the plate to the other, not showing that you're not going to eat anything.
So there's like non-verbal ways of communicating what you think about the food.
Non-verbal, yes, non-verbal, but not to show it really off. So it's a secret for not knowing people. Or you like it or not like it.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, thank you. That's a really good suggestion. Because sometimes I think about it too, like, have you heard of the term, like, you know, like you eat like you've been in prison? Like, yeah, like when you like eat very hunched over and very fast so no one takes your food away.
You have sisters and brothers.
Oh, yeah, that too. Another kind of prison. Yeah. Yeah, the play acting is something that we definitely want to incorporate. Yeah. What about if, like, setting the food aside, if I was a cook and I saw you set the food aside, would I know that, you know, you don't think it's delicious, but you're too polite to say anything? So, like, how do people get better as cooks?
You say it, but it's
I'm just because I come from such a, like, my family will just say it. So.
No, it's you have, in art you say it's interesting. So you have some words which mean it was awful, but it sounds polite.
Okay.
And I think some of the cooks would know it.
I think that's so interesting, the coded language that you can use too.
So my family, they did understand it. So.
Oh, cool.
Also
Okay.
some cooks, but it was in the time I was growing up.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Thanks for your suggestion. I want to think about that more. Yeah, the way that you eat food and how that. So, what was your reaction to like the mukbang thing?
The one who was eating so.
Yeah, or the like this idea that there's a huge YouTube trend where millions of people every day are just watching other people eat, because like that is such a big thing that in my research I found that the people who were most popular were the ones who were eating the most messily, and so like this one guy who was very popular. He's like just stuffing food down his down his stomach and like chewing like with his mouth open and crying sometimes, and then also like making out with his boyfriend. He's like number 2. Yeah. And then, but then there's other ones who are, like they talk about it a lot as they're eating, where they're like, oh, like I know this guy likes it when I take really big bites, or I have to shove food in, and then it's too much for their mouth, so they have to keep like a spoon or a fork under it to keep it moving in, like. Because I think that the way you eat is such a sign of. I think there's a book about this, like the way that you eat is like runs parallel to the like development of a society or civility, and so it's like it was something that used to be like kind of managed by a lot of government programs, and I can't remember what country, but. Yeah, there is something to that. There is a reason why there's so many rules around how you eat. Yeah, thanks. Thought bubble.
Maybe here one code for not liking something is saying, "Can I have the salt, please?" And then the other point about eating so much, I remember in my teenage years there was always this big trend of some guys eating a lot of food as fast as they could, and everybody would watch them. But back then it was not on virtual reality. I mean on social networks. So I think the trend is very familiar to me, but I think it's interesting that now they put it like out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another thing that came to my mind, the way we were cleaning berries. We had this 2-meter long board, and it was like this declined, and they would roll down, and we would have to pick out the leaves. And as a child, I always enjoyed this a lot because you have to. I don't know, you see so many different types of berries, and I kind of liked it, and I was wondering if this would be some kind of if you could turn this into a game, maybe who, does it the fastest, or I don't know, I just thought it's, yeah. Did you also think about, how to clean food, to incorporate that aspect into the gaming?
No, not yet. Yeah, that's a really good suggestion.
Or when we made, we have a type of, it's not illegal, but it's a type of moonshine. Mm-hmm. It's made from rowan berries, as they're called in Austrian, called Vogelbeere. And the cleaning process of the Vogelbeere is also very, very elaborate, and you use a kind of a big wind machine for it. So I think around cleaning food, you could also maybe... are you focusing on the eating part? Because I thought that could also be maybe something to inspire you for some games.
I think that's a really good point, because I love dexterity games, like things like Jenga or like making card houses. I love things that you do with your hands, and that's definitely a part that I want to incorporate into the games more. And so yeah, I hadn't thought of cleaning yet, but I think that's a really good, it's a really good tip I want to try.
We're slowly coming to an end, so 2 more questions, please. Anybody? Oh, there. I didn't see that. Sorry.
Thank you for your talk. And one question, have you thought about mixing up like cutlery from different nations with the shape of food? So, for example, in Asia, give a big steak to people who eat with sticks might be difficult. Or in countries or places where they eat with their hands, try to give them with a soup. Eating a soup with your hands might be difficult. Mm-hmm. Also, if you, let's say, you eat with leaves, giving them soup might be difficult, or, yeah, but somehow mixing up nations and the physical shape of food.
Yeah, I like that. Because actually, so have you've seen like the cup of noodles that comes in the big styrofoam cup and with the lid, right? And so Korean, like in Korean culture, you actually use that lid as a spoon. And I didn't know this until I saw my Korean friends doing it, but you fold the lid so it becomes a cup, and then you use that as sort of like a mini bowl that you like take the noodles you pick the noodles up, and then you put it on that to cool it down, and then you eat it, and then you can also dip that little cup into the soup and drink it. And so that reminds me of, And that's something that not a lot of people know about. And so I think that'd be really interesting too. Yeah.
So last question, please. Please. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for your talk. It's less of a question, but maybe more of an answer to your first question there. That I'm afraid might start some debate in the audience. But if people ask me what's unique about Austrian cuisine, then my standard answer is the only thing that's really unique about Austrian cuisine is that in Austria you can have dessert as a main course, and that's the only course of your dinner. So with that, I would like to encourage you, if you haven't experienced it yet, to taste some Kaiserschmarrn during your residency.
Is that the cream cake?
That's one, yeah, it's 2 days.
Yeah, but have it as main dish, and as
the
an
big pancake.
Oh, the pen. Okay, yeah, that was really
and as an
good.
inspiration maybe for a game, I think to bring some technology in, because that's, I don't know, what I'm interested in. Maybe you can take that Austrian inspiration and add some blood sugar level measurement or something.
I definitely want like a cholesterol counter to the heart. I'm not used to eating so much meat. I mean, I'm having a great time, but yeah. But yeah, I think that'd be really interesting too.
But in this spirit, thank you very much for your talk, and
Thank you
we're
for
going to
the
break it
time.
up into smaller groups. Thank you.
Okay.